I think with Trump, there are two ways of dealing with Trump. There's the way that most liberals choose around the world, which is to lie on the floor, kicking and screaming and hoping he goes away, or you engage with him because he is president of the United States, and you try and be persuasive in argument. And my experience of him from when I was competing in Celebrity Apprentice, years ago, is that actually in the boardroom, if you put up a good argument, Trump was quite happy to be persuaded to change his mind. And I just think that people at the moment still don't actually understand. He's essentially a business guy, and if you want to do business, then you got to do business with him.
Well, he's putting America first, and he's not letting anybody push him around. And in terms of the G7 summit, Trudeau actually, probably shouldn't have said those things about America and Donald Trump on the eve of negotiating with a nuclear tyrant. It's not a very fair thing for him to do to Donald Trump.
Well, hold on a minute. When you say putting America first, and and it's like, and in not being pushed around, in what way is Canada, or indeed the EU, what way are they pushing America around?
Well, they put a lot of tariffs, for instance, on dairy products. And I think Mr. Trump is putting, or threatening to put tariffs on Canada in order to start a negotiation and to change things around. It doesn't mean that that's the final deal. It's just a point of negotiating.
But why does this all have to be done either by Twitter or storms or by sort of angry, statements? Why is this stuff not just negotiated quietly in a business-like manner? We're unhappy about this. We'd like you to cut this tariff, and we'll cut this tariff, as opposed to launching a trade war, which nobody thinks is going to end well.
Well, I think he does that for his supporters and to show America that, listen, I'm not going to back down. I'm defending our interests. I don't care about currying favors with world leaders. I'm here to defend you, and that's it. I think he kind of says those things like to throw like a dead cat on the table, and to get the story going somewhere else as a distraction. But at the end of the day, this is all part of his negotiating strategy, and it's tactical. Yeah. I don't think he really believes it.
So if it's tactical, he doesn't really mind upsetting and allies and brokering a sort of distrust among the NATO allies at a time when we've got a lot of disorder in the world, a lot of threats from Russia and elsewhere. He doesn't mind doing that as long as he looks good to his Republican base.
Well, he's also, put in Macedonia into NATO. He's completely backed NATO. And we're when he was pushed to, yeah. Well, but he's a disruptor. He's out there to change the system.
Let's look at it from the perspective of some of the Trump's base, his supporters, who don't seem to think he can do any wrong. From their perspective, they may be saying, look, he said he would crack down on this. He said he would deal with it. These people are entering our country illegally. We don't know. He always called them, he said Mexicans murderers and rapists. But they accepted that viewpoint. These people, we don't know who they are. They're now being prosecuted for the crime. They've entered the country illegally. We can't put the kids in prison. What are we supposed to do with the kids? It's the parents who've caused this issue by committing the crime of illegal immigration. It's not the government's fault. If Donald Trump pushes that line, his base are going to say, they're going to shrug and say, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Julia, and let's be very clear. Donald Trump is doing this horrible thing, this Nazi-like behavior of separating children from their mothers. The president of the American Pediatric Society described it as child abuse, and the United Nations Human Rights Commission called on the United States to stop this behavior. But Donald Trump is doing this also to build electoral power and try to win the midterm elections in November by appealing to the right-wing and extreme right-wing base that likes the idea of we keep out the Muslims, we keep out the Mexicans, we'll protect American jobs, we're making trade wars with China. It's all part of a piece. It's all part of Trump's appeal to the ethno-populist, white supremacist nationalists who vote for him. So there's that element, which, by the way, is paralleled in Europe, where in Germany, Trump attacked Merkel, and they're having a migration crisis. In Italy, where the new government is also attacking immigrants. This is part of a chill wind sweeping across the Western world.
For a lot of American voters, particularly in the southern states, but actually often these things actually have a bigger effect psychologically on people in further northern states that aren't directly affected. They don't see the difference. They're illegal immigrants. They've got no right to be in this country. They will use terms like swarming across the border. And they would say, and I can absolutely see people on Trump's base saying, look, these kids are being separated from their parents because their parents have illegally entered the country. They wouldn't have been separated if the parents hadn't committed that criminal act. It's not our problem. What are you supposed to do? These kids can't go to jail with the parents. You need to prosecute the parents. What's the issue? This is a problem that the parents themselves have created. I can imagine there are a lot of conversations going on in Trump-supporting households around the American states where that conversation is playing out just like that, and it's not doing Donald Trump any harm at all.
That's the other half of the equation, Julia. So if you talk about Trump's emotive language, you talk about the cynical approach to some of his hardline advisors, like Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And when I say undocumented, what I mean, for example, is remember that when someone crosses the border, they have not committed a criminal act if they are seeking asylum. And you have the right to do that. And what's happening now is that these immigrants are being stopped before they can reach to claim asylum. Let me just cut to the chase here. These distinctions, as you note, are lost if you can politicize the issue. And about half of Republicans still believe that separation of children from their parents is absolutely fine, despite everything we've seen.
I mean, to be fair, anybody who is arrested and put in jail is separated from their children.
Yeah, but again, Julian, look, these people, since April, when this policy was instituted, this is not a case of people who have been convicted, children are taken away. Yeah. They've come across the border before they can claim asylum, which they have a legal right to do. They are seized, put into a court system, often for months, however. The children are taken away. So in other words, these are not criminals. Yeah. There's no legal basis for doing this. And that's why Trump and his people keep resorting to the fiction somehow that there's a mysterious law.
Yeah. I think it's extremely important that the President of the United States comes to Britain and steps foot on the land and shows his support for the country. No matter what happens to Brexit, no matter what happens to anything, the relationship between the U.S. and this country is stronger than ever.
How important is it to him? Because we know that he's very keen to meet the Queen. He's a big fan of the Queen. He knows his mother's always been a big royalist. Would he be coming if tea with the Queen wasn't an option?
No, his schedule's still a little bit up in the air, but I think a visit to the Queen is very important to the President, as it would be for anybody, because she's the head of state. So it's a normal protocol, and I know he's looking forward to it. And I know he's looking forward to coming here.
So there's a lot of talk of protests being held against him when he arrives. And indeed, the planned trip a number of times has been put off and even cancelled, it looked like at one point, because of the prospect of major protests, particularly in London. Will the protests have any effect on Donald Trump? What will he make of them?
I don't think so. And I don't think the aspect of a protest was ever a relevant factor in terms of coming or not coming. But yeah, I mean, that's all part of it. He's used to contrary opinions of one thing or another, and he's comfortable in where he wants to take the country and the road he's leading everybody, including the worldwide
You're saying he won't be remotely bothered by lots of people chanting against him on the streets?
I don't think there will be a lot of people chanting, I would suspect. But I think he's used to people disagreeing with him, and he's very comfortable presenting his own point of view and presenting it in front of large audiences, as you've seen, just recently in Nevada.
What's your message as his representative in the UK to those protesters, those planning to protest against the American president visiting?
I think together, this country and the U.S. are much, much stronger and much more prosperous when we're doing things together, as we've done for 100 years and more.
He has praised Putin consistently, despite the fact that U.S. intelligence has concluded that Putin interfered in U.S. elections in 2016 and is planning to do so again in 2018, despite the fact there was chemical attacks on an assassination attempt in this country. And yet Trump has not criticized Putin and now is poised to meet with him, which I think is raising a lot of alarm flags in places around the national security community.
But it is extraordinary that he's able to just flout, I suppose, all of the norms of modern political behaviour.
He is, and you're absolutely right to highlight that it's baffling why he does this when it's so politically costly to him. I mean, to announce a summit with Putin while he's under criminal investigation for obstruction of justice and for his campaign potentially colluding with the highest levels of the Russian government is beyond me.
It's just extraordinary, isn't it?
It's just breathing life into the story more. And that's why it continues to raise these questions. I mean, Trump has insulted everybody under the sun. He's insulted Meryl Streep. He's insulted, every possible person you can imagine, but not Vladimir Putin. And it continues to raise the question of why. Why is he willing to sacrifice American interests, attack NATO allies, and yet parrot Kremlin talking points? And there's an increasingly narrow number of explanations, and most of them are not innocent.
Will Donald Trump care whether there are protests and care about large blimps of him as a crying baby?
Well, he shouldn't care. He knows perfectly well that one of his predecessors, George W. Bush, who came and paid a state visit in 2003 just after a massive protest about the Iraq war, he had to face demonstrations. He didn't pay any attention to them, and the demonstrations didn't make a blind bit of difference to anything. So the same thing is going to happen this time round. There's a freedom to demonstrate in this country, fair enough. The blimp, personally, I think, is a silly jape. And I think that's how Donald Trump should regard it, and he should just brush it off.
Do you think it was a poor decision by the London Mayor Sadiq Khan to approve the blimp?
Well, it does look a little bit like Sadiq Khan is pursuing a kind of personal vendetta against Donald Trump because they had a clash of tweets, I think it was, or a clash of something not so long ago. It does have a smell of pettiness to it, and frankly, if I'd been mayor of London, which is a remote possibility, I wouldn't have allowed it.
Do you think this was actually going to harm our relations in real terms, harm the relationship between Theresa May and Donald Trump, and harm our chances of getting, even if it's possible after the fudge from Theresa May, any sort of Brexit deal, post-Brexit deal in terms of free trade?
Well, it shouldn't do. It shouldn't do because the United States and the United Kingdom have vast interests invested in each other, whether we're talking intelligence, defense, or the economy. I mean, we are each other's single biggest foreign direct investors, and that's a big, big thing. And it's stuff like that that ought to be the prevailing factors in discussion between Theresa May and Donald Trump, and not demonstrations, absence of cheering crowds, and all of that. I also think, Julia, that he will be immensely chuffed to see the Queen.
Yeah.
I think this will be very important.
This is what we keep a royal family for.
The photos that he'll take back to the United States are not going to be just of the balloon or screaming demonstrators, but of Donald Trump and Her Majesty the Queen.
The NATO allies that Trump is going to, as it were, pull a G7 and blow the whole thing up. Over, in this case, his demands for allies to spend more on defence. It's highly unpredictable. All of the ambassadors and the and ministers are saying, well, don't focus on the American president's tweets. Focus on what's actually happening on the ground. Focus on American military drills that are taking place in Europe, military placements in the Eastern Europe, and you'll see that actually things are going quite well. And there is something to that, but it's pretty hard to ignore the fact that the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, is on his way over to Europe from Air Force One, hurling abuse at his allies and threatening to blow this whole thing up. So there's a lot of concern about how this is going to go.
Well, indeed, and not least a concern within the European Commission and European Council. President Donald Tusk had this to say to the President yesterday.
Dear America, appreciate your allies. After all, you don't have that many.
That is a pretty undiplomatic words from the President of the European Council there, Tom. Is it true America doesn't have many allies?
Well, I mean, it's striking coming from Donald Tusk, who's a former Prime Minister of Poland and has spent his political life basically fighting to overthrow communism and restore democracy. You don't find more of a committed Atlanticist than him, so it's pretty striking. What this is about, though, I think, is a bigger story, a kind of debate inside Europe about how the hell you deal with Donald Trump. You saw this play out a few months ago when Emmanuel Macron, French president, was showering him with praise and flattery. Angela Merkel had a very different approach, a sort of understated way. And Theresa May just hoped to keep her head down and not to get in trouble. And none of these things worked. He withdrew from the Iran deal. He withdrew from the Paris climate change deal. He tore up the G7 communique. And so now I think there's a growing feeling here and maybe in some European capitals as well that actually we may as well stand up to this guy and make it clear that we don't agree with what he's doing.
In Edinburgh, we're doing a march. We're going to be doing some speeches. There will be a collection of banners that have Donald Trump's most egregious statements and comments, and we'll be symbolically covering those up with positive messages in solidarity with people who he has oppressed, such as the asylum seekers coming in on the southern border and so on. So there will be some more symbolic political statements made. It won't just be noise. But we would also love to have the balloon up here because the best way to deal with a toddler is with toddler behaviors. You've got to get on their level for them to hear and understand.
Well, you say that. I would say better to be the parent. That's what I did with my toddler. I didn't get down to her level and throw food and things. I was the parent. Do you think there's an element where this man has such a thick skin, and because he so limits what he does see in terms of news, so Fox News and the like, that actually these protests are really going to be just about virtual signalling to yourselves and getting on the telly, as opposed to actually changing anything about what the American president actually does?
I'm not even sure they're intended to change what the American president does. I think that they're intended to signal the UK government about what the people in the UK want. And I don't think people here want to be aligned with Trump. And I think Trump is so busy saying America first, that to think that you're going to get good trade deals with him is naive.
We're making the leader of the free world, the elected head of government and head of state of our biggest economic trading partner and our biggest military ally. We're making him feel unwelcome. Is that a good idea?
Well, I would say mission accomplished, because I think that was the whole point of our protest, that Trump isn't actually welcome here. And a lot of people agree with us.
Yeah, but not the majority. The majority of people don't agree with you. They don't like Trump. The majority of people in the UK, the polling's very clear. They don't like Trump. They don't wish he hadn't been elected. They think he's bad for America or bad for the world. But they think that he should have been invited and he should be here.
But then lots of polls show that millions of people agree with what we're doing, and I think
but not the majority.
That our voice has a right to be heard. Obviously, the fundamental cornerstone of liberal democracies is the right to protest. That's what we're doing.
Absolutely. But is there also risk that, look, we don't like, many of us, a lot of what are the things he says about women, about Muslims, about Mexicans, and lots of his actions. However, he is still going to be playing a crucial role in our country's future economic prosperity and safety. Should we not perhaps, some people might think, at the very least show a degree of respect, if not for the man, but for the office he is the head of state?
Well, I think hopefully this protest and how it's made Donald Trump feel should be a lesson to him. And he needs to think about how Mexicans feel unwelcome and how Muslims are made to feel unwelcome and how actually lots of women in the US are made to feel unwelcome by his presidency and his administration's policies. So I think he needs to reconsider some of his policies that have been actually detrimental to many US people.
There has never been in history a U.S. president who has stood beside a Russian dictator and has praised the Russian dictator, defended the Russian dictator, and pissed all over his own government, national security officials, and U.S. intelligence service, including the CIA, taking the side of the Russian KGB agent turned dictator against America. In America, what we Americans are saying this morning is that our president has thrown our country under a bus and sided with a lying Russian KGB dictator who interfered in our elections, defending the Russian. And a lot of people in America are worrying, and they're not conspiracy theorists anymore. Does Putin have something on Trump? Why is it that Trump goes out of his way to defend Putin against his own government?
I mean, this is it. It's not, is it, Robert Fox, sort of naivety, as some have suggested at all. I mean, this is a man who gives absolutely no benefit of the doubt to his supposed foes, enemies in the EU, or indeed Canadian, Mexican allies, and yet always is willing to write off any accusations about the Russians. What did you make of the press conference, Robert Fox?
Well, in a way, if you were looking at pure entertainment, Netflix and YouTube, it was hilarious. It was absolutely hilarious. But there are two things that I want to observe from that. Not only this thing about, backing the Russians and also inviting the Russians or acceding to what Putin had suggested, saying the Russians should investigate Russian interference in the American political process, which was bizarre. We may have 6 years more of Trumpery. If he runs for, and I do think he'll play to the base. I agree with Alan Friedman. It's quite likely that he'll be re-elected, but we cannot build a global security alliance based on this kind of clownish activity.
The president has a habit of misspeaking, and
I think he just calls it speaking.
And look, I mean, he stretches the truth. He exaggerates. It's sometimes it sounds more like bar talk when you sort of exaggerate your prowess in some degree. But look, he also is a very plain speaker, and I think that annoys some people in the establishment that there's a certain snobbery. And I think that one of the reasons he got elected and why he's so popular is because he's a plain speaker, and I think he's reached out to a different audience.
Well, you say he's a plain speaker. I imagine a lot of Trump supporters and certainly Republicans who perhaps have given in to the idea of President Trump weren't very happy when he stood alongside the totalitarian leader of basically an enemy state and basically said, "Nah, I believe him over our own intelligence agencies." I mean, that was quite something for the American people to stomach.
I agree, and I think there was criticism both on the left and the right. As usual, the criticism on the left was absolutely hysterical, and it's again, just another day of the Trump derangement syndrome, where he could save puppies from a flood, and he'd be criticized by the left and most of the media.
Is not the reality that there are an awful lot of Republicans now who are waking up to the idea that this guy is not up to the job?
No, I think that a lot of Republicans criticized him for that moment, and I think throwing Dan Coates under the bus was a mistake. And by the way, that line I just read from the president was not from Trump; it was from President Obama in December of 2016. So that was after the election, before the inauguration, when Obama was asked about Putin meddling in the election. So, like Trump, Obama realized that there was meddling, and Trump has said it on 4 occasions in the last 2 months that it was Russia. So, either he was changing his mind and, twice in 24 hours, or he made a mistake. I'm not really sure. I hate to speculate on that, but it's really, the hysteria is standard, but I think the fact that the criticism also came from the right and from his inner circle, I thought that was refreshing that he flipped on it.